Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Farrukh Pitafi, viewers, the regular host of this show. Sana Maqbool was traveling internationally during the last week, and today also she is still traveling. But tomorrow, hopefully, she will return to this program, and I will resume my role as the resident analyst in the show. But today we are going to talk about economy of the country. Of course, there are many angles to it. The country's economy is still struggling, and it is still waiting for the bailout from IMF. That is not all. While this is going on, there is another battle that is being fought between the Supreme Court and the Parliament, where it seems that the State Bank of Pakistan has become one of the battlegrounds. State Bank of Pakistan was asked to release certain amount, 21 billion rupees, regarding holding of elections in one province. Of course, it is everybody keeps on talking about complying with the Constitution, and this apparently is for the support of the Constitution. But somehow, mysteriously, that very Constitution does not seem to apply to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where also the elections were due. So this instruction is particularly about one province, and that continues. There are many aspects to this as well. There are people who keep on citing India's example, that in India, even national elections take place in various phases. Just to actually put this thought on the map, let me also point out that India in population is 7 times bigger than Pakistan. And that's why its national election also take place in 7 installments, right? That means that wherever elections take place, the unit is again the population of Pakistan. So we have to realize this as well. But Supreme Court of Pakistan ordered the State Bank of Pakistan to release this sum to the Election Commission. And we have seen that at a time when economic crisis is going on, making State Bank of Pakistan controversial or penalizing the head of the institution might actually be counterproductive. But the matter then went to the cabinet. Cabinet sent it once again to the Parliament. Parliament has rejected the notion. So at this moment, it seems that again, salaried people like you and I are going to be affected by it, nobody else. But we are going to talk about that as well, and then we have to talk about the possibility of IMF's package that might be released anytime soon, because there has to be first staff level agreement, and then it has to be vetted by board. There were certain preconditionalities. Pakistani government says that it has actually fulfilled all the demands, but we keep on hearing from the reporters that Pakistan so far has been able to collect the assurances which were 50% of what was identified by IMF as the deficit. So we are going to talk about all these matters and what exactly to expect in coming days, whether we are going to get some economic breather because the common man on the street keeps on suffering. The head of IMF, whose picture you just saw, keeps on saying that government of Pakistan should be levying taxes on the rich, not the poor. But usually what her staff actually keeps on demanding puts all the pressure on the common man on the street, who is struggling to survive at this moment. In order to help us understand these issues, we are joined by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former advisor, Ministry of Finance. He's also someone who actually led the team in the in the conclusion of the previous IMF program that was actually fulfilled. That was the only one that we succeeded. And thank you very much, Dr. Safa, being part of the program. Then we are also joined by Dr. Niaz, who's a political analyst and also a columnist, writes for Dawn. Thank you very much, Dr. Safa, being part of the program as well. Let me start with Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Dr. Saab, your take on the economic state of affairs, and whatever the sideshow continues in the country, is it going to affect positively, affect the economy positively or negatively, sir?
Patafi sir, thank you for having me. Always my pleasure to be on PTV World. So obviously the economy is not in a comfortable position. It's like a stagflation sort of a scenario where we have growth which is near 0 to 0.5%. We have inflation which has gone nearly 35% year on year last month. But what I worry more is the food inflation, which is nearly 47%. It's an uncomfortable position. Large scale, even today, if we see the figures that have been released, has contracted over 5% in the first 7 months. And February's contraction is, bigger in terms of the last February. The HSD demand, the MS petrol demand is down somewhere between 50 to 20%. The electricity year on year demand is also down 9%. So, what you're visibly seeing is a contraction in the economy. What you're visibly seeing is a slowdown of the economy. What you're visibly seeing a policy rate of 21%, taking its toll on bringing the economy both on the demand side and on the supply side to be on a slower contractionary path. Part of this is, of course, being in the IMF program, which to control the fiscal and the current account deficit asks us to do this. But this time, of course, you must remember that um, the adjustments that we did with the fund over the last 6 months have been extremely abrupt. Whether it was petrol, whether it was electricity, whether it was gas, then came the 170 billion in taxation. So all this has taken a toll on the economy. Then, of course, I mean, holding the rupee slightly to a kind of a peg with the dollar once that was released, that brought in a lot of exogenous inflation. The last 10 rupees, even what you saw, is part of what happened to the rupee. And that is where I think the IMF should have been a bit more considerate. Pakistan, all in all, had done most of the things. I always say, having dealt with the last program as well as this one, and with other countries, Pakistan or other countries go to the IMF when they're in a balance of payments challenge. Now, if you've gone to the IMF for this, so part of arranging the dollars is the responsibility of IMF. So they cannot totally put this on the financing that has been arranged by Pakistan. To the extent that we've arranged the $3 billion out of the six that you talked about from friendly countries, the multilaterals, the bilateral partners, the flood monies, the commercials, I think there is more of a role of the fund than it is ours. But then, I mean, we want to move forward. So now to unclog this economy, take our reserves from somewhere near 4 billion to $8 billion in the next 3 months. The government, of course, has had to take very difficult steps in the last 6 months of its existence. Yeah, that's always difficult. I've always advised that do an IMF program the first half of your political tenure. And if
Right.
you couple all this with the uncertainty, it's a difficult call for Pakistan.
Dr. Najeeb, before I go to Dr. Niaz Murtaza, very quickly help me understand this, economic model where IMF keeps on asking you to keep very high a policy rate. Then, of course, its interventions are going to add to the inflation as well, because we are being asked to actually keep on raising the costs or taxes on oil and electricity. With all that is happening, then they ask us to also ask Pakistan also to tax the economy. When policy rate is so high, do you think there is going to be any economic activity that can be taxed, or then once again it has to be GST, and people have to be further asked to tighten their belts?
So, that's a very good and a very technical question. So, let's see. The part of the inflation is coming from the cost push, a large part in Pakistan. Electricity prices, administered prices of gas, administered prices of petrol to an extent because you have a PDL of 50 rupees on the petrol, then raising of the taxes, then the rupee deval bringing in the exogenous inflation, the external inflation, then supply side constraints because you don't have the dollars to buy the wheat, to buy the pharmaceuticals, to flood the onions, then the supply side constraint that came due to the floods that were, once in a lifetime kind of an event that happened in Pakistan. So largely that's where the inflation is coming from. There is no doubt about it. But on the other hand, there is also the effect of what happened in the last government's tenure was there is a turf facility given at 1%, where a lot of money, I think it was 660 billion rupees that flowed into the economy, which did create a demand for machinery, which did create a demand in the economy, and the rates were kept probably too low for too long. So to catch up, I think the fund asked us to pull the rates up. Here also there is a very particular view I have. I think these should be tied to the core inflation in Pakistan and not to the headline inflation. I think that also got changed somewhere in the middle over the 2 years, where we started thinking that we should tie it up with the core inflation in Pakistan. I think is 19% in rural and about 20-21% in urban areas, or vice versa. So we are somewhere in that. So we are almost positive on the core inflation, and I think that's almost enough. Let's see the lag effect of this demand control in terms of the high rates that we've done. And you can see that the large scale today shrinking 5.6% for the first 7 cumulative months. And I think the shrinkage on the February is more than 11% is itself quite high to show how slow the economy has become. And
Absolutely.
so
Dr.
it's
Hakan Najeeb, you have used many terms as well. For example, the distinction between core inflation and headline inflation. I think our viewers will be interested to hear what exactly does that mean. But allow me to actually bring in Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, it is important to remember where we are at the point we are at in our history, especially recently. I think I have said this before in this program as well. A few weeks ago, I asked the finance minister regarding the appointment of the DG or debt management office. And I was told at that time in that public press conference that Pakistan has interviewed many people, but they have been offered an opportunity, but they don't want to come, because of the package issues, they want more salary. Secondly, also because of the instability and the fear that they met, this may actually damage their careers. So at that time, all this that is playing out in Supreme Court and Parliament regarding the State Bank of Pakistan, do you think that it is going to have healthy effects on Pakistan's economy in coming days?
Well, I think what we should remember is, a very big chunk of the economic crisis is because of the political crisis that we are facing. First of all, it's creating uncertainty in the market. Nobody wants to invest. Nobody wants to bring their money from outside. And then the second thing is that, it has paralyzed the government from taking any bold steps, whether in terms of, controlling the fiscal deficit, or whether it's in terms of, increasing oil prices, electricity prices. So you see a policy paralysis, and that together with the uncertainty in the market is making the economic crisis much, much worse. Which was, created by the floods, it was created by the Ukraine war, and it was created by the way, the 6% growth rate in PTI's last year was achieved not through increasing investment or productivity, but by increasing current account deficit, fiscal deficit, and money supply. And when you, jack up your growth through these artificial means, you obviously are going to have a crash, and then you have to go through this stabilization process with the IMF. Now the thing is that we have one foot in the door in the stabilization process, but IMF is not opening the door fully to let us in, and I think it's being unrealistic and unfair. They can certainly, ask Pakistan to do more when it's got to do with things which are under the control of the Pakistan government in terms of policies about fiscal deficit, current account deficit, exchange rate and all. But to, make it a condition that you should first get money from everybody else. That's forgetting the fact that, IMF is the lender of last resort, and being lender of last resort doesn't mean the last one who lends to you. It means that, when nobody else is lending to you, IMF is supposed to lend. To that extent, I think, IMF is prolonging the agony, is prolonging the crisis, and I think it's time, that they should sign the deal, and that will bring in, a lot of money, much more than, the 2 or 3 billion extra that they are asking from, friendly countries.
Absolutely, Dr.
So,
Saab. I'm glad that you actually mentioned how IMF should be behaving. I totally get it. But what should we be doing at home? Because I think that if, for example, if it is true that, this debt management office, DG cannot be had because of the circumstances, at that time, if Supreme Court actually penalizes the acting governor, state bank, or the state bank itself, do you think that it is going to play out well internationally?
well, that is the problem. It's state versus state, institution versus institution, which has, made things more paralyzed. And, I mean, the Supreme Court is stepping into areas which are way beyond its purview, giving orders to the state bank to release money from, the consolidated fund. I don't know what they are going to do next. So yes, definitely there is IMF, and then, there are other forces within the country which are unnecessarily, creating problems in a very difficult situation for the government. And unless, everybody can sit down and have, a dialogue, it's hard to see, how you will get all these adversaries away from each other's neck, and, in a situation where the whole nation can get together and try to deal with these challenges. So it's an unfortunate situation where natural crisis, external economic crisis, political crisis, and institutional crisis have all come together to create this mess.
Yeah, a perfect storm. But again, Dr. Saab, I'm not averse to all this talk of hopey, changey stuff. But with due respect, people don't seem to come together and sit together on the same table. And especially when it comes to not merely political elements, but also judicial elements, then it becomes more complicated. And let us hope tomorrow, when this case is going to be heard, there's going to be some sanity exhibited, because everyone is watching. International media and pundits, right-wing pundits from Michael Rubin to Indian pundits as well, are predicting Pakistan's collapse, God forbid. In that state of affairs, perhaps we have to be more prudent. Let me come back to Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Dr. Saab, before going to Dr. Niaz Murtaza, you were actually talking about the distinction between core inflation and headline inflation, and you used lag effect, other terms as well. If you want to first qualify that, please do, and then I can ask you a question.
Sure. So why I say you should have policy rate more closely looking at the core inflation is because core inflation is where we strip out food and energy, and we take the other goods and services and take their price change, whether it's year on year or month on month. And the reason we take out food and energy is that it's volatile, and in energy it's administered prices by the government. So core is a better measure in terms of measuring the long run inflationary trend in the country, and not the transitory price changes. So if you can see the core softening, or if you can see the core, getting stabilized, that tells you how the not the transitory but the other measures are behaving in the economy. And also the lag effect. By what I mean is that if you've increased the policy rate, so the it takes a while for the demand to shatter in an economy, a couple of months. For example, if you even see in the US, they've been hiking rates for the past several months, but it was only last month when we saw the figures that we saw a bit of a taming in the inflation in the US. So that's what I'm saying, that we have hiked quite a bit in Pakistan. So let's see the next couple of months how the effect on the demand side is, in the terms of the supply of money in the
Right.
economy,
But
the
Dr. Saab,
circulation
just to
of.
clarify the point, when IMF demands that we keep policy rate high, is it merely to tackle, inflation in the country, or is it also, does it also have something to do with the, current account deficit? Because then when there is such a return, people start parking hot money, and that's how you get some kind of breather when it comes to your current account. But there is a counterpoint to this, that whenever this happens, if you're going to get 21% profit, why would you invest in anything but here? That means that then the market is going to shut down, and then all the money will be in banks.
So, Pitafi sir, one of the arguments here also is that once you take the rate so high, so I'll give you an anecdotal evidence. The other day, one of my aunts, who's quite aged, called me and said that, I have some property, or I have, I want to sell it and I want to put my money in NSS because I read on television their rates had gone up. So that's one part. The other part, though, is that it also the dollarization that is happening in your country. Everyone is trying to invest in dollars because they think that's the best store of value. But once you have NSS offering you between 18 to 20%, there will be people who will now not hold dollar as a store of value. So there is a certain strengthening of your rupee that transpires because now people want to hold rupees
Do we
instead of just
have
holding dollars.
do we have any measure of such investments, sir? Because I understand what you're saying, that if there's going to be some undocumented investment, they perhaps are going to become part of the system now. But on the other side, if I'm, for example, a hotel runner, or for that matter, bus runner, or any business in this country, and I don't actually, I barely make, my break even, and I see that there is more profit, why would I not actually divest and invest in these, fiscal, possibilities? Why would I not go to the bank and submit all the money there? If there is not going to be money in the market, if there is not going to be investment, how would the economy run, and what on earth are we going to tax in coming days?
So correct. So right now you're trying to stabilize the economy. You're trying to have a soft landing of the economy because you don't have the money to import new machinery. You don't have the money to import new cotton. So you're trying to slow down the economy. Because you're trying to do that, one of the ways is to bring down the demand for the currency in the country or the demand for investment. But this is of course transitory. As we see the inflation going down, which let's say happens in the next 6 months to a year, you would see a reversal of the rates, which would also come down the policy rate, and then you would see a new kind of investment. Right now, Pitafi Saab, Pakistan's growth or new investment or trying to think that this economy is going to create a lot of jobs is not going to happen. You are in a balance of payments crisis, you are in a current account crisis, you still are managing your current account by holding imports, by trying to put administrative measures. So you have to go through this process of stabilization. Once this is complete, your exchange reserves your exchange stabilizes, your markets stabilize, your reserves build up. Then we can start thinking about growth. I think right now growth is at the back burner for at least a year or two in Pakistan.
Right. So we have to keep on taxing consumption, especially when it comes to petroleum products and electricity, and that's how IMF hopes we are going to actually take care of the economy rather than any kind of economic activity. Very quickly, let me go back to Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, earlier it was pointed out that food inflation is above 40%. It is somewhere around 47%. Now the concern right now is that you and I perhaps can sustain that kind of pressure, but a household of 5 in small towns where this inflation might be affecting in the worst way possible, and who doesn't make that much money, the head doesn't, how is it going to affect them, and what is the solution? Because every time we talk about cushioning the poor or vulnerable, we end up talking about, Benazir Income Support Program, SAS or something else. But what about the middle class that is shrinking and more people are being pushed below the poverty line?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tragedy, because as the economy slows down, it has, a direct impact on, income opportunities for the lower middle class and for the lower class. And it goes all the way down, not just the small towns, but even to the rural areas because people migrate to the larger cities. But when opportunities shrink there, they have to go back, they don't have any money. So in that case, yeah, but then cash transfers are very helpful. But then the fact, as you point out, is that it's not just the lower class that needs cash transfers. Many of the people on the margin in the lower middle class also need, some help. And then, the scale just becomes too big. Right now, the government hasn't done any new cash transfers after what it did right after the flood. So, there's no help for the people. The economy is shrinking. The state is not in a position to, come up. Private charity, of course, steps up a little bit, but, it can't fill the full gap. And that's where it's important for the IMF to, create the cushion in terms of, the fiscal demands that it is making to allow the government to be able to help, not just the poor people, but even the lower middle income people, because otherwise, you can push the country so much that, demand just shuts down for a very long time, and then it becomes more and more difficult to, resuscitate the economy and to, restart it and to keep getting in. So I think there is something for the IMF to look at it too. First of all, go ahead with the deal, and then create some fiscal pressure so that the government can create relief for the poor people who desperately need it. And again, even for the donors, there is a need for them to step up. The flood response was quite poor. There were promises made, but very little of that money has come in. So, it requires multifaceted solutions to, get Pakistan out of this rut.
Right. Dr. Saab, those monies that were pledged at Geneva, do you think that they are not coming in because of the IMF deal? Because everybody is waiting what becomes of the economy, what becomes of Pakistan's credibility, or is there something else also involved?
Those should not be tied to the IMF deal at all. Those were for poverty alleviation, for humanitarian purposes. You can't really tie humanitarian aid to, IMF aid. You don't even tie it to, political facts. Even, in Afghanistan, if there is a crisis, and despite the Taliban being in power, if there is a humanitarian crisis, then everybody is bound to help. So I don't think the donors should tie it in any way to the IMF deal. They should look at the situation on the ground, the misery at the ground level, and open up their purses, the promises that they've made. It's time to deliver on them.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, let us now talk about the optimum policy choices that the government has to ensure the IMF deal actually comes through, and then after that the government has the kind of fiscal space to ensure that the people who are getting poorer every day, there is some solace for them as well.
So, Pitafi Saab, I'm going to take the liberty of answering a question you asked Niaz Saab about hiring of the DG debt. And that liberty I'm taking because I've worked with the finance ministry for over a decade. So I was an outsider. When I got offered the job at the finance ministry in a similar kind of position, when I took up, it was a similar kind of a DG position. And I now say this. It's not about the money. It's if you want to do public service, then you come back and do it. But the other thing is that not everyone's prepared with that mindset, and the people now around in the world, Pakistanis or else, are looking for at least a compensation which is slightly commensurate. I think any change that would start, and having served there for so long, um, I think would start if we were to build the competence of finance division, privatization, energy ministry, investment ministry, because these are the ministries which really need professional input. I understand that the kind of monies that are offered, because I've been on that money, is difficult for people like us to come, because the others are offering such a high kind of remuneration. Even I would probably not be able to go back today and take up. So I mean, and I'm being honest here. My father was helping me while I was in Islamabad, because it was so expensive to be there.
Right.
What I'm trying to say here is, but this has to change. Any coming government, the first order of business is to build competence in all the areas that I've mentioned to you. And this is
Right.
my
And does
most
that also
sincere
include, Dr. Saab, sorry to cut you, but does that include offering lucrative packages also? Because somehow it becomes a speculation game and scandalizing of such possibilities. Because I remember, one staff officer of former Prime Minister, when he was working with the then Prime Minister, told me that the public sector in Pakistan is the worst salary opportunity provider, that they keep on giving you the same kind of compensation which might not be competitive with international standards or even local market standards. So if that is so, do you think that anybody in the future will want to actually come and join and work here?
So I think you've just explained it very well. And of course, remuneration has to change. And then a bit of fencing for these people also has to happen, to let them work. Because when they come in, I speak with experience. There is a bureaucracy there. You have to deal with them. So some kind of political patronage is the word I would use, or political
Support.
strength has to come into these people. So now come. So I think that's number one thing to do. The other things, of course, Pakistan path is very clear, Pitafi Saab. Without, as Niaz Bhai said, without an IMF program, you're not going to go anywhere. So you have to do the IMF program. Whatever we need to do, now this $3 billion, but sometimes we also create an issue. I'll give you a slight example. When the government announced this cross subsidy on the petrol,
Petroleum.
I think the timing was wrong. The intention was good, but the timing was wrong, because you were in a ninth review. So what happens? Why does IMF keep getting delayed? It gets delayed because then they start asking, tell us it. So we tell them there is nothing to do with subsidy. But so try and be careful. Close it as soon as you can. The other thing now to do is to think, how are you going to do the 10th and 11th review, because another $1.2 billion are due. The 10th review was due in February, the 11th review is due on 3rd May. So somehow combine these, then have a budget, Pitafi Saab, which is very fiscally responsible, which also does somewhere on the expenditure side. It reconciles, brings down the PSDP, it targets expenditure on the current side, some pension reform to be seen, so that once you cross this hurdle of 30th June, when you enter a new year, you don't enter with 6.8% of fiscal deficit, but you enter with a better position. And then some kind of debt reprofiling. You talked about debt. Just think about it. We are going to spend 5,600 billion rupees. I mean, I'm going to repeat that figure so that everyone understands. 5,600 billion on the markup and the debt payable. So that's $20 billion. And hiring of a good team. And it's not just DG debt. There is a whole team. There's a debt team. There's a reform team. There is a team which deals with the IMF. Then there's a team which deals with energy sector, circular debt. So all these teams are peanuts compared to what you're spending. And that's strengthens what you said. So, then you need to do some kind of debt reprofiling. And then you have to start thinking about a new IMF program, because the next year is another $25 billion. And that's how I think this would play out. Last thing, what you said, our plan also has to come through. it can't be just reliance on a memorandum of economic and financial policies put together by the IMF. Our plan on agriculture, our plan on direct taxation, our plan on taxing the agri sector, the retail sector, the property sector, our plan on improving our, manufacturing sector, our plan of opening up our economy, doing the regulatory framework. I think that also has to come through in the next.
Absolutely, Dr. Saab, but here's a humble submission. At the start, when you actually began your presentation, you actually mentioned that there seemed to be a policy paralysis. And on the other side, when you were talking about this petroleum subsidy, targeted subsidy, but nevertheless subsidy, you said that the timing was wrong. So at this moment, I don't know whether it is just my paranoia or everything is going wonky. For example, all the institutions which were not supposed to be political, they seem to be operating politically. Supreme Courts are not supposed to be political, but somehow their intervention in an economic matter seems to have political and economic repercussions. Similarly, IMF is supposed to be an economic, essentially a financial tool, but we see that there is this uncertainty that keeps on creating policy paralysis. Why would it not be by design? Can you explain to me that?
So let me say this in this way. I think political instability is part and parcel of Pakistan for the last 7 decades. What has changed today and what is hurting the most and what is bothering you the most, and which it is bothering me as well, is that there is an air of certainty that doesn't seem to be settling in Pakistan. The air of a political cycle, an air of an election cycle, and an intervention, and what I call, you have also on your end, over judicialization of issues has taken place. I think time today is where the leaderships, and when I say leaderships, I mean the political leaderships, have to put their head together. I was just going through a TV channel, and someone had said that both Imran Khan and the Honorable Prime Minister said things are very bad. So if they think things are very bad, it's for all these, sensible people, these are mature people, to sit and decide on a political cycle, so that this over judicialization, which bothers you, bothers me as well, and the Supreme Court trying to sort this issue when the mandate probably lies somewhere else, doesn't happen.
Absolutely. There's, of course, you have addressed more of the internal argument, and that is also important. But I wanted to actually also refer to certain, positions or state of affairs that have taken place. For example, Bangladesh, which is close to India, and of course West, gets relief. Sri Lanka is still struggling. Pakistan is struggling. Ukraine, first time ever in the history of war, gets a package while it is at war. So that was the question that I wanted to actually focus on. But allow me to actually go back to Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, I understand that it is difficult to talk about the conduct of Supreme Court on television. I understand that many independent-minded pundits would not actually like to suggest that the Supreme Court resist the temptation to actually lean too hard on State Bank of Pakistan. But that was the question that I asked you at the start. Now the question is there a possibility that if something of that happens tomorrow or day after tomorrow, it might severely impact the economy of the country, and that's why these judicial bodies should stay away from economic matters?
Yes, definitely. That's been a repeated issue in Pakistan's history since 2008. The decisions about even before that about Pakistan Steel cost us dearly. The decisions about Rico Dick cost us dearly. And then the Panama decisions cost us dearly, and the cycle just seems to be going on and on and on, and it's now getting worse. I mean, certainly, there is a way of, if the Supreme Court feels that the government is dragging its feet on the elections, then the right way to respond to that is to, target the government, the executive, issue them orders rather than, going behind their back and starting to, issue orders to the state bank, to the defense ministry, to other institutions. So I don't know why they don't realize that this is all creating a chaos from which it might become
Right.
extremely difficult.
Sorry to cut you. I'm told that we have to conclude the program here. There seems to be some breaking news, but that actually brings us to the end of the program.